Before I even begin to speak about women's roles in ministry, I want to acknowledge something important. Throughout Scripture and through history, women have done extraordinary things for God. The Bible is full of strong, spiritual, courageous women who stood for truth, carried God's message, and helped shape nations. Deborah was a prophetess and judge who led Israel and gave wise counsel. Huldah confirmed the rediscovered book of the law to King Josiah. Mary Magdalene was the first to announce the resurrection of Christ, the greatest message ever given. Priscilla and her husband Aquila helped teach Apollos and strengthen the early church. Phoebe served as a deaconess and a helper of many in the ministry. Even in our own faith history, we see women like Ellen G. White, a prophetess and messenger of the Lord, who guided the early Adventist movement through divine instruction and tireless ministry. So there is absolutely no question that women have played an essential role in the work of God. They have preached truth, taught the young, comforted the suffering, and brought revival to homes and churches alike. The real question: what has God said about order? Now, the question is not whether women can serve or lead. The question is, what order did God himself establish for leadership in his church? Because in Scripture, the issue of who leads or preaches publicly is never about ability. It's about order and representation. From creation, God established a divine pattern. 1 Timothy 2 verse 13 says, "For Adam was first formed, then Eve." That order was not about superiority or inferiority, but about function, the way God's design would reflect his relationship to his people. That's why Paul writes in 1 Timothy 2:12, "I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." He is pointing back to the creation pattern, not to limit women, but to protect the order God made sacred. 2. Understanding the pulpit, a symbol of headship. The pulpit is not just a platform, it is a symbol, a sacred position representing spiritual headship and teaching authority in the household of faith. From the priests in the Old Testament to the elders in the New, God placed this representative role in the hands of men. Not because men are better, but because they symbolize Christ's role as the head of the church. Ephesians 5:23 says, "For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church." So when a man preaches or leads the congregation in that capacity, he represents Christ in that symbolic relationship. If we reverse that order, it's not just a social change, it becomes a theological confusion. This is why many of us who study Scripture closely believe that women's ordination, meaning placing women in the same authoritative position as elders or pastors, moves away from God's established order. 3. True women's ministry, the biblical model that does not mean women have no place in ministry. In fact, women's ministry is vital, but it must follow the biblical pattern, not the modern cultural model. In Titus 2:3-5, Paul describes true women's ministry. "The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children." That's not a small task. That's the foundation of the church's moral and spiritual life. When women mentor, teach, nurture, intercede, and support the mission, they are doing powerful ministry that no one else can do in the same way. Again, we see this clearly in the Adventist movement. Ellen White was never ordained as a pastor or elder, but she ministered under direct inspiration from God, guiding both men and women in their walk with him. That's the perfect balance: equal worth, distinct roles. 4. The root principle: order, not inequality. The Bible doesn't restrict women because of weakness. It defines order because of representation. In the same way that Christ represents God's headship and the church represents submission to his love, the order between man and woman in ministry represents that divine relationship. Breaking that pattern doesn't elevate anyone. It only blurs the image of Christ and his church. That's why this matter isn't cultural, it's spiritual. 5. How to hold this conviction gracefully. In today's world, this view can be misunderstood or even rejected. But the Bible also teaches us how to stand for truth. 1 Corinthians 16:14 says, "Let all your things be done with charity." We must hold our conviction with humility, not hostility. Even when others disagree, we speak with calmness, patience, and love. Not to prove ourselves right, but to honor God's design. The goal is not to silence anyone, but to return to God's order so that his Spirit can work freely within his church.